Perfect. Thanks a lot.
I hope this works. I never did it before.
We'll see. Got it. It should be recorded locally. So welcome everyone and to I think it's our 6th YC Finance community call. YC Finance is the community where we fund more solar to go green. You can check it out, yc.finance. You will see the pools that we have already connected, which are a limited pool of solar projects in UK, 57 schools that have solar rooftops where we mint solar carbon credits directly from these rooftops, also testing the protocol. But also, if you really into it, you can here indicate that you're interested in participating in our first beta that has already started. We're looking to gather more more interest and then more participation around the YC token launch, which will refinance and fund more projects in Portugal first. Yeah. So today on our call, we have Crowdmuse, and next week we will have Fund the Planet, another real-world data-driven impact token project with the rainforest tokens. And today's talk with Crowdmuse will be actually about, okay, now that we have these high-resolution carbon credits on chain coming directly from projects that are either avoiding CO2 emissions on the ground and proving that on chain, as well as capturing CO2. How can we have these crypto native or Web3 native tokens actually be used in a crypto native way? So we have Maz and Aman from Crowdmuse. I am already a very, very big fan because I mean, you're going to tell all about, and I will definitely ask questions into, but what I see number one in here is that you really put many things together that are today possible with smart contracts and distributed or decentralized coordination, collaboration, and put that into how do we actually make fashion or wearing stuff more exciting, more meaningful, and on demand, meaning less wasteful. And like the solution is super, super interesting, and definitely keen on getting our hands on the first drops. With that, I would I would give the floor or the Zoom call to you, Maz.
Yeah, I'll share screen. Yeah, I mean, we don't want to make it too like pitchy, but I guess, you know, this helps. But
yeah, definitely.
yeah, so we've had a quite interesting journey today, but I think just to kind of get you guys familiarized with who we are. Up to now, internally we are running it somewhat, like a DAO structure. So our team is pretty lean, and we call each other contributors. We like to have no hierarchy, but some leadership at times helps, as you know. So I'm one of the co-founders or co-stewards, and so is Iman. I guess my interest in sustainable fashion somewhat sprung when I was in my undergrad university. This is over 10 years ago. And I met my co-founder then, who had ties to the textile industry in Bangladesh. And obviously, fast fashion is huge over there, and just like really poor, ethical working situations in factories, etc. And so we decided to go into the industry, but also go into it from like a more of a sustainable perspective. And so how we did that was we had ties into some micro facilities that were growing at the time, and there was this access to organic cotton springing up, somewhat kind of consumer interest to I guess access much more sustainable materials. This is like 2011, 2012. But realistically, the market was just not really there yet. The cost was super high. And I guess after 4 or 5 years of exploring that world, and actually visiting some of these factories in real life, it was very obvious that something had to change. And it's like slowly over the years is kind of sustainable fashion is trying to move towards a lot more, or fashion in general is moving towards something much more sustainable, but there's still much more work to be done, mainly also particularly from a brand perspective. But interestingly, from our perspective, and I guess I can just move on into this flow, but like, I guess moving on to like now in terms of where the industry is at, that there is a lot of much more access and growth to micro factory facilities, obviously like Portugal, the north of Portugal, Braga, has got a ton of micro factory facilities and so on. And so the access is much better, and it's kind of getting to a point in which like realistically now we need to kind of create, somewhat products that are just becoming much more accessible in the market from a consumer standpoint, and kind of, moving ahead from this excuse of not being able to access sustainable materials or sustainable products, because it is there, the demand is clearly there. So how do we kind of like get access to the supply? But
for those who are not in fashion, what you mean with micro facilities or micro factories, like how big or small are these?
From a kind of from a production standpoint, usually these guys would be kind of your made to order, just in time, or like minimums. The size of the amount of people could be anywhere from like 15 machinists to like 20 or less or more. And then like, for example, with A Industry, Decode, Rapa Nui, and a few others, these guys do have had facilities as like a one core like flagship, let's say, and then now kind of expanding across different locations, or just expanding into a bigger location. Obviously internally it's very ethical, there's no kind of mistreatment of people, in that sense, and the materials that they source, tend to be on the kind of sustainable side rather than the utilization of polyester, for example. And then, and Paula is obviously very familiar with this, but I think when you go into a factory, it's very clear kind of what their practices are. And then obviously you have certifications and so on and so forth. But obviously it does require trust of the supplier. And because, from our perspective, accessing suppliers is one thing, but also relying on what designers or brands say to us about their supply being sustainable is also another thing to verify, right? And usually that kind of happens like the GOT certification and all these other things like that organic cotton has, like it's been very kind of easily accessible. And some people might say like the GOT certificate is kind of like, the label that you have on your tuna can that is like bullshit, and like now it's so in the market that it's just a sticker. But I think there's obviously like if they misuse certain things, then I'm assuming they do get caught up, they get penalized or whatever for that. So that's to answer your question. But should I move on?
Yes, sorry. I hope you don't mind that I interrupt, because I'm just picking up info as well.
No, all good. We've kind of just like, I'm trying to set the context here a little bit and before going into the product. But I think that, as an overarching thing, Crowdmuse, essentially what it is that it's a multi-sided marketplace. We are building the backend infrastructure that utilizes an NFT in a sense. It's a modified ERC 721 contract with splits and ownership of creator assets. And essentially what we say is that, okay, creators can come onto this marketplace and they can drop their items, right? Their collaborative products. These products that are created, they're created by single player creators, let's say like a pattern maker or a lead designer, or it could be a multitude of different designers and a brand, let's say, working together to do these drops. So naturally with any kind of product, the supply chain is very kind of multiplayer, it's very collaborative, but especially when it comes to something like fashion, that it's so, culturally specific and really relevant. Things around like who has created what, the granularity of the creation is just still not, you still can't see it. Like you have got a lot of softwares and products trying to showcase provenance and footprint, but like the granularity in terms of like the human that kind of interacted with this, or the entity that interacted with this, is still relatively hard to depict because it's usually kind of hidden under the brand, let's say. So what we see is like, you know, you have products, right? Like a physical product or a digital physical product. These products are naturally created by a multitude of creators or individuals or a brand, let's say. And then we kind of classify them as like creator networks, because these creators can either be independent and working, you know, kind of within their own creator network, let's say, or within their own trusted network, or they can just like, let's say a 3D designer can go into another network and vice versa. And this is a bit more of a kind of, I guess, a visualization of like what a creator network would look like. So that's more on the kind of like creator side, and the, I guess, the demand side of creators wanting to do drops and wanting to continue having collections and so on and so forth. And then you have the supply side, right? So most of these designers and most of the brands that we talk to have got already access to the supply, because it takes a lot of like relationship management and trust between one or the other. So it's already kind of value aligned by the time we come in a sense, in that scenario in which the designer or brand already has access to the supply. And so from that multi-sided nature of the product, supply chain is obviously one thing, and supply is the other side. And interestingly, we wrote an article about this about a couple of months ago, which was actually looking at a terminology coined by Deloitte, actually, called supply webs, whereby supply chains actually move into a web structure, basically showcasing, like, if you were to look at, let's say, a protocol or a network, you can actually have ties or access to a lot more, let's say, micro facilities, but in a more kind of abundance, in a sense, in certain kind of web structures. Now, it sounds a bit abstract, actually, but in reality is actually, it makes a lot of sense, because you do have clusters of these kind of micro facilities springing up across locations. And so it's about kind of how do you provide that level of access from a demand to supply perspective, let's say. So I thought that was quite cool from a supply perspective. And conscious of time, but I think one thing that would make it very simple to understand is the product in itself. So taking all those, I guess, learnings and concepts and somewhat best practices in the industry, we thought Web3 was basically a pretty obvious place to utilize its features that it provides, and somewhat enablements that were previously missing, you know, from like a software perspective, let's say, or in a Web2 stance, because it doesn't provide any real visibility or transparency or ownership of individual kind of creation. And so we've taken this nature of this kind of multiplayer economies and really kind of this collective mindset of brands and designers to say, hey, why don't you just do a collaborative drop for your community? And we will ensure from an interface standpoint, your community has somewhere to buy it. And you also have a place in which you can deploy the NFT, right? So from a very kind of no code, low code perspective. And I guess the key features for this MVP that's coming out in the next month is the creator splits, which showcases the percentage in which each individual is earning from the revenue of the product, from the sales of the product that they drop together. And within that, you have a ton of different types of contributions. So the cool thing about this, I guess, on-chain enablement and the visibility that you can create from a supply chain perspective is that when you have access to, let's say, one brand, if that brand gives consent, let's say, to obviously open source and open up basically their address book as part of this creator split, you then actually get access to a ton more other interesting players, like the pattern maker, the print designer, the manufacturer. And so it is kind of our vision and mission, and essentially to bring in these crypto native players that are interacting with these tools, but also the IRL suppliers and the manufacturers and the real kind of people from the source, in a sense, if we can go that far, to showcase the true kind of source of truth of how a product came to be, in a sense.
And basically, when you say participate in a drop, that's literally opening up the process of collaborative design, coming to, okay, this is what you're going to produce, and the community or fans of this collaboration actually pre-order, right, and get the funds for number one, you know, retrospectively sharing the revenues with all of the existing collaborators, but also fund the production and delivery and everything of until I get this particular item of the pre-order.
The production side is really interesting because I guess speaking truth to our, or like staying true to our values in a sense, we obviously want to make sure that we work with manufacturers that are somewhat verified on the sustainable side, but also, you know, just ensuring that we don't kind of go into a fast fashion cycle.
Mm-hmm.
This pre-order mechanism is essentially like what you just mentioned. So what that does is when we talk to a supplier, it's very obvious what the minimum is and what the kind of like, obviously what the client's demand is in terms of minimums or the max they want to hit. But really the purpose of this is to say, I mean, I guess there's an analogy or there's a kind of concept about this kind of pull mechanism that this creates, whereby previously what happens is you would go and buy, I guess, all your kind of sourcing and fabrics and everything like that, and then go and sell, and then you kind of go out of pocket, right? And so pre-order is saying, hey, let's just get all the collectors in, let's get all the buyers in, let's get our 50, 100 minimums, whatever hit, and then we go into production. So the consumer does have to wait probably about 4 to 6 weeks maybe to get the item if it's on a made to order basis, but that's okay because at least the product that they get in their hands is going to be something of good quality and it hasn't, you know, used like bad labor, like, you know. So I think the consumer's okay to wait for that. So this pre-order functionality provides that kind of initial cover of working capital and cost in a sense.
It's definitely an antidote to the fast fashion, like whatever is going on there, or we have been used to. This is literally the opposite, and I can definitely, I mean, for me, it really speaks a lot. Like at some point, you have enough clothes and you actually don't want, and then also, I mean, working with Paula and then all this time about opening and connecting to the sustainable fashion side, and with Paula, your background, you are much better there to put forth all these, but actually to understand how much of an impact I have with what I'm wearing, right? And then also to actually use these drops and campaigns to create additional awareness of, you know, big growth or big growth can be very, very different and appealing, and it doesn't have to be this I don't know what people imagine about what's going to happen when we don't buy more stuff every day than more than yesterday. So I love it.
So yeah, I'll pass it on to Iman in a sec because he's the energy brains here. But like, I think the cool thing about this is that this is kind of it's weirdly, this UI is like a consolidation of like a ton of different industry signals, market signals, like consumer signals, kind of wrapped up in this kind of consumer looking friendly thing. And so, but they're always going to be a layer in which, like, how much visibility can you actually provide in the footprint of the product? Like, the current existing, and I think this is where it can go into the energy part, is that from a footprint standpoint, like a lot of the information from for a fashion supply chain has been sitting in softwares like the supply compasses of the world that basically is somewhat gated, but it's still utilizing third-party data sources. So that source of truth is not necessarily there. So if there is mechanisms in which you are inserting kind of, signatures or verifiers of, certain manufacturing methods to say this is using this level of consumption, then realistically, we can make all these products like, much more transparent in how it's been created. And I guess that's our kind of longer term aim, is either taking data sources from existing data sources or partners to say, where do they sit within the value chain and how do we insert that information for any given garment, let's say, for that level of granularity of the footprint. Is that, Iman, anything else on that, or should I go through the product bundles, or do you want to take over?
Yeah, maybe just adding, I guess, from the multi-sided marketplace and what we touched on, the supply webs. The interesting that happens with any type of marketplace when there's new technologies involved. The example that we've been sharing recently is RidePal initially was ahead of Uber when it came about into providing rides on demand, but they were doing it less curated, where the drivers would set a price and would say where they're willing to go. And Uber came in and almost collated that and set a price based on the timing and made it super easy for consumers to make something or request a product that they need without having to think about the time, distance, price. And so I think what this technology really enables is this multi-sided marketplace where this supply web becomes almost on demand for the consumer. And based on their needs, it simplifies all of the decisions they need to make around what's the best supplier in terms of materials, what's the best manufacturer in terms of consumption. And what we tried to do in this very e-commerce-y thing that if you don't look closely, you almost miss that there's something kind of supply chain-y about it, is each contributor in a way has a set of verified credentials, whether if it's for the 3D designer being a person that has that skill and has contributed to other products in the past, all the way to the manufacturer who has adopted a solar panel roof and is making sure that the water used in the production process is minimized and avoiding any chemicals used. And we see these verifiable credentials being almost stamps that, similar to how Uber tried to collate a lot of the options within the marketplace, we try to make it a lot easier across all of these carbon credit marketplaces to almost just simplify that into a stamp that says, yes, based on the energy credits that they hold, based on the carbon credits they hold, they meet our minimum requirement that they are a sustainable supplier. And we let the third parties do the verification around which marketplaces for energy credits and CO2 credits we actually partner with to bring onto the platform. So I think just seeing that in this lens really helps bring that to life. So the consumer doesn't actually need to know anything about energy and what's renewable and what's not. It's just saying, look, these guys just have a stamp, and once they've proven that, they can be part of any product co-creation. So if a brand like Adidas comes in and says, I want to do a community drop, or a smaller brand like a Web3 native one with a PFP community wants to do a drop, they almost have an option between many different manufacturers that say they can produce that jacket that's built for the community with their manufacturing site. And so that whole product creation cycle becomes simplified because of this supply web that comes together.
I had a little question on the little certificates. How do you plan to show these? Because it's like at the end it's going to be a bouquet of different kind of own certificates, right? So and if the end consumer wants to know it, it's like, what is there also a dashboard where I can see everything, or is it connected also to my garment with a ship or QR tag? Or
yeah, great question. And Maz, I think unless you have anything else to add on the product bundle, we can jump into the next piece of the slides. Share my screen. So for now, in terms of our actual initial MVP, it's been quite simple, where each role that is able to contribute to a product that we're collaborating with, they're able to add an asset. So again, for the pattern maker, this asset might be a 3D file with a ZPRJ extension. And the manufacturer can add anything, whether it's a PDF or kind of a proof of token that I'll kind of go into. So for now, we're just enabling it just based on something that you can bring and attach on chain through IPFS. Of course, some of these assets can also be encrypted so that designers feel protected, so that their assets are not right-click copy pasted, and there is some kind of access control. But trying to simplify this to first answer your question and then dive deeper into this. The way that we see this is what we were just viewing in the previous view was the set of roles that can participate in the co-creation process. And as mentioned, each of these roles have a creator that is submitting something on chain, whether it's that design asset that we talked about, or some kind of PDF that proves the energy consumption and carbon intensity. On top of that, since we actually want to add that verifiable conditional on top, from a manufacturer perspective, really what this looks like, and I'll try to give it in the example of Unity and how that credit might look like. And feel free to correct me if I simplified this too much, because I know the architecture.
Oh, cool. No, I like how it's coming together.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
let's assume we've talked about the product side. There is a profile side that we'll delve into deeper, but in terms of how typically proof of impact certification might look like, there is either an investor that is able to kind of co-invest in a solar asset or a manufacturer. I will not go into too much about the revenue sharing side that I find absolutely interesting from the Unity point of view, but here what we take from that is in that transfer of a power purchase agreement, the manufacturer basically has to them some data around how that energy is produced. So whether that energy is direct from solar, let's say 95% or 87% of the time, and then the remainder of the time, they're pulling from the grid that has some kind of carbon intensity. And so with that data for now, it's going to be quite simple in terms of just a badge that represents during the duration in which the garment was produced. So that could be monthly or it could be by second, as we kind of experiment into what Molly was also talking about, being able to actually second by second, or let's say minute by minute, track what that footprint was and awarding a badge that lets within their profile then be able to say that we are currently and in the past have been producing renewable energy, and whatever we manufacture across these different dimensions of footprint, they're able to bring on-chain proof to show that they actually have been awarded this. So initially this will be somewhat manual, where we will take whatever, let's say YCO2 NFTs that have been issued from the manufacturer and something around the actual technical data to award this non-transferable badge that is awarded based on some frequency. So again, either weekly or monthly. And from that, we're able to distill for the given garments produced during that period, what was the footprint of each product that we sell. And transversely, if a consumer buys that product, they'll be able to actually track what was the net footprint, whether it's energy, water, or chemicals, for every product they buy on chain. And we really think that's the exciting kind of evolution of this, is consumers, because the entire value flow, both in terms of where the value purchased is distributed across the value chain, you can also do very similar in terms of what is the net footprint of each consumer. And so this is almost like an intervention to enable this consumer-driven adoption that incentivizes manufacturers to adopt more and more of either renewable energy assets or some kind of offset, where in the past it has been somewhat voluntary, and kind of hopes that by having done that in a voluntary way, manufacturers are able to increase their demand. And so by kind of doing this in a way that the consumer is leading with that demand, because they're able to choose which products they actually prefer, the manufacturers receive that demand upfront and see the case for being able to upgrade their facility to make it more sustainable.
Yeah. And that's like, this is really wonderful. As you said, the consumer doesn't have to check a lot of boxes, but really just see, okay, what is more sustainable of my choices here from these special drops. But the entire work on finding, right, or sourcing that has been already done by this network of collaborators, co-creators who have been doing the curation, as you say. And on one side, it can be that, okay, our manufacturers are, or they come with the supply sides and manufacturer networks, and that manufacturer, for example, doesn't have solar. But as soon as this the information is there that, for example, drops that are also produced with solar energy or partially solar energy have more value, right, with respect to their impact. If that can be valued, then actually we're creating these new incentive schemes in the back end to actually have more solar. And for Unity Finance, Unity Crypto or YC Finance, it's about funding more solar to go green. And there also one can see how we can add actually taking on the revenue shares as well, add additional incentives like cashback, for example, if you're putting your YCO2 credits that you get as reward from funding solar on these roof manufacturer's roof, for example, and that then results in more sales or in being picked more often by these designer communities, then definitely also you see how that can become a positive positive incentive and feedback loop where it actually pays off and is more more efficient to have and fund more solar to go greener. That's what I really like, and I also like that such a network of value creation actually offers something to these projects like Unity Crypto or also rainforest tokens, for example. And there are others that actually keep the quality of the project, right, connected, and it's not a commodity that you can buy by the megatons on the financial market. So this is a real alternative for these, for creating new incentives, in my view.
Yeah, definitely. And the interesting part is there's so many experiments happening to provide different types of incentives. So as you mentioned, the revenue share for investors that help this kind of asset scale up. What we saw when talking to all types of creators, so even on the supplier side, we are working with Earthis Network, and we're trying to see if we can do a drop that directly monetizes their existing, let's say, hemp textile innovation that they're working on to create different products directly. So that would mean that we would bring them in as a potential supplier in one of these co-created products. And that does help with, let's say, these micro suppliers and micro factories, because if they've already invested, they're able to now increase the demand by tapping into these types of marketplaces that we're building. But in terms of scale up, I think this is why we've taken an interest in Unity Crypto. There is a need for these manufacturing sites and micro suppliers to scale up their production, and that typically needs additional upfront capital. And so the way that we're positioning this is, as we co-create these products and prove there's revenue flowing because of the type of supply that, let's say, Earthis Network is able to provide, that provides incentive for investors to come in and say, okay, I see that there's real products being created from this. I would actually be willing to invest in new technologies that scale up that production, because there are more consumers or more brands using that manufacturer, and it is time for them to scale up that production. So we've decided to start on that, really the product creation process, because once that happens, in a way you can prove that there's value and incentivize more investors to come in and either invest in more solar assets to grow that, or more technologies across the entire climate solution spectrum, on bio-based materials, on recycling products, on all of these things that have typically been reserved for big brands to invest in early and commercialize. And with my background, I used to work first in universities. We sold our technology to a big company. They sunset the IP because it was competitive, even though it was actually a better technology than they were doing. And you realize that these big brands and big corporations won't make those decisions because there's so many other incentives within that corporation.
Yeah.
So if
cost. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so if you decentralize that and say, look, there are technologies that need commercialization, it lets the consumer then see from the products they buy how that technology will change their footprint. And that almost from a storytelling point of view, I think that becomes the biggest incentive to be able to kind of skip the middlemen that are just kind of value extracting along the way and let the consumers and decentralized investors be able to scale up the technologies.
Yeah, that's pretty much what my question that beforehand taps into, because I think we once talked about this stamp score. The more stamps you have on your product, the more value or the value it is in your value system, right? And I think it's a great incentive to really scale the positive impact up. I really like. I see totally the game there.
Yeah,
It's like the win-win-win situation for everyone, for the
and it's really the
producers and the brands.
Yeah, and it's really the positive feedback loop, because right now all the conversations are about, okay, sustainability means we have to sell less and it's going to cost us more, and basically there is no incentive for businesses to do anything or act. But and then because they said, okay, until now we could externalize everything and make profit, now they ask us to internalize the externalities, and that's like bad or lose. But then also, like, literally we're all losing, including our in livelihoods. And with this year, you're creating literally a marketplace for each drop, and then those marketplaces are obviously connected, because then I can see between multiple drops and say, okay, this one I like this and this, but this one has more sustainability stamps or more value tags or more stamps, and to see that, like, to get me into this collector's mindset before owning something in the physical world is definitely can be a game changer, because it changes how I see these typically invisible values. And then again, when wired the right way, then the market mechanisms do work, right? But it's just this laissez-faire, hands-off. We create a commodity market, and then we'll find a price that doesn't work. And also, I don't see the value to think in that terms when we have this technology that actually helps to decommodify, because you can tokenize more granular values and add it to and make it more visible. It's super, super exciting.
And it's also, to be honest, it's also not really possible just with like one player doing it. You know, it does require like an entire like ecosystem kind of overlap, or like figuring out, like, I guess the exercises that we're going through with you guys is understanding like where it was very clear kind of where it sits within the value chain, but then how does it integrate? What's the proof of concept for it? Because from a theoretical perspective, like most of these models just do make sense, and I think it's come to a point where like the technologies are better to have the integrations happen, but obviously it's subject to like experimentation and so on. And I think that kind of resonates with why we've decided to kind of keep the marketplace for the time being somewhat closed, and accessing just somewhat vetted individuals or brands that we want to work with, just to kind of set the tone for the data in itself, right? And the information that is coming through the network, so that by the 10th drop, let's say, there is a lot more kind of patterns and IP amassed on chain for these creators that they essentially are the verified owners of. They can continue monetizing and be incentivized to grow, I guess, from an ownership standpoint and a monetization standpoint, but also from a supply perspective. Then you would have potentially this composability or this access to these webs in a sense. But after 10, we're kind of thinking to start opening up the create flow. So obviously from this nice UI that you see here is obviously the front end, but there's a create flow of create function for the product owner or brand, let's say. And then the eventuality of it, or the vision of it, is really to kind of have this kind of open protocol so that people are utilizing the supply and demand that they require. But then how do we ensure that, the sustainability of it remains, and the kind of production kind of values remain within that when it becomes more open, is pretty important.
That's right.
Hi, I just have a question.
Guaning.
Oh, yeah, thank you for noticing it. Hi, I'm Guaning, and I just have a question because it seems really interesting. Also very disruptive, I must say. And like, how mature is this company / I don't know, project is at the moment in this stage? And also, like, you also mentioned it requires a lot of participation from the, every individuals from both ends. Do you already have like brands which are showing engagement or like those kind of signals? And I would definitely love to see the white paper too, because it's so interesting.
Yeah, we're going through that daunting task at the moment. It's taking forever, but yes, we're going to be out with it soon. We'll send it over to you guys. But stage of the product, Iman and I pretty much spent coming into it full time since May last year. Prior to that, it was, ideation, discovery, and on Iman's part was tinkering away at the concept for a while. And I guess we kind of both were in parallel universes, and then we met, and then it meshed. So it was weird timing. It was meant to be. So yeah, a stage of the product, we're pretty, I guess, pre-launch, if you want to call it. We're in this kind of beta environment at the moment. So we're in testnet, just doing the kind of standard testing and functionality stuff for a user perspective. Throughout that time, we kind of narrowed it all down to, I guess, what would be the go-to-market product. And it kind of was obvious that the market was moving us towards, like, how do we showcase traction and monetization of this multiplayer economy thing and transparent supply chains. And so we had to kind of just say, let's just, bite the bullet, whatever that saying is, and essentially just do the marketplace yourself and create the traction. So that's where we're at. In the next month, we're looking to do the first drop, and then it would open up the pipeline of the first 5 to 10 drops for the remaining of the year. And in terms of who's doing the drops, it's a mix of, I guess, brands that are pretty like online brands or online communities, like the one that you saw, Meta Factory, is basically kind of like an on-chain factory that works with a lot of Web3 communities, but also has a big kind of creator network. And then within that is also quite like individual creators that also want to work in a multiplayer or in a collaboration. So sometimes when we talk to the designer, they already have the idea of who they want to collaborate with. So we just work with them to do the curation and the coordination, and until they're ready to do the drop, basically, on the front end. In terms of the brand question, that's a really good question, because I think eventually the purpose of it is to move out of the Web3 kind of, I guess, audience somewhat, so that we can do much more onboarding externally, and then traditional brands and, I guess, small to medium-sized brands or even larger brands could kind of utilize this as a form of an experimentation or incubation with, let's say, collaborate with a designer that we have on the network, and just to kind of see if that makes sense for them. And then surely they will probably continue or not. But, larger brands is a bit more difficult to depict where they're going with this stuff, because some of them are sitting in the digital fashion metaverse thing, thinking that's going to save the waste issues of fashion, which I don't think it will. But it depends on where their monies are deployed, and I guess how much return they get on investment. So
yeah, interesting. And then, like, do you have any investors, or right now it's really a bootstrapping?
Right now we are bootstrapped, yes, and we're going for our fundraiser of pre-seed. We're just going to do a typical, like, standard, I guess, startup round, pre-seed round of 500K.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. I mean, I'm excited.
Yes, keep us in the loop, please. No, this is super cool, and also a couple of connections maybe to follow up on. I don't know if you remember or know Boson Protocol, but they went exactly. They basically they're only on the delivery and shipping side. So once a drop like this happens and it gets produced and then it's ready to ship to the end user. How can you make it such that it can, travel along a trust less because it is games theoretically connected across such a supply network, basically. Again, I think what we're talking about currently is all just pilots and showing what are the connections and what are the possibilities. And also with respect to showcasing that we can actually use a manufacturing facility with solar on its rooftop and mint the stamp directly when it's being produced and add that directly to this list of values. That again, as a proof of concept, can be done with the current the current deployment of what we have, for example, and then connecting it appropriately as low cost as possible, because again, like we're in the business right now of showing what's possible, right? And then helping people who want to get in and support actually see, okay, and when we support with our resources, how far can these communities actually go? And yeah, like super exciting. And the one side, as I mean, Paula introduced me to that as all these digital or digitally moving brands, right? That they also need these exploration spaces and communities, and are definitely interesting parties if they're not a drag. Meaning if they don't want just PowerPoints and explanations, but actually, thank you, Koning, actually are ready to test it out. And yeah, next week we'll have Koning and Renee from Fund the Planet. We'll see about more tokens that have this high granular visibility on how actually CO2 is being captured or avoided on the ground, and then how those values are being priced is a big question of mine, of course. Today, I mean, with what you have shared also, Iman, I could definitely see that new pricing options are there that might be more efficient than this commodity pricing, trying to figure out, because as said, what we offer is not really a commodity. If it's pointing towards solar on commercial and industrial or on economies that are local and have different values, as I say.
Yeah.
So we're approaching the end of the call. I really appreciate.
Ask you a little a final question. It's like a very typical standard interview question, but where do you see Crowdmuse in 10 years?
I thought you were going to say 5 years.
Okay, start with 5 if that's easier. But...
where do you think we're going to be, Iman?
We still need to do a proper brainstorming with the whiteboard in the back.
In best case, if there are no obstacles, you just gotta run through.
Yeah, I'll just throw one out, and then Mass, feel free. I think the closest thing would probably be some kind of multiplayer Shopify type of thing where you could sell any type of product and find the skills to do it. Personally, I'm excited about like film and animation as well. So even beyond the digiphysical of like energy and fashion and food, hope creativity is the thing kind of that we value in the future once we become post-economic. I don't think that's in 10 years, but maybe 20 years.
Nice one. Thank you, guys. That was really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It was nice to see everyone, and yeah, thanks for arranging this.
Take good care. See you soon again.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Sally.
Bye-bye.